We are in our series on end times and prophecy. The series is heavy. The series can be confusing at times and overwhelming. And I know that last week I hit you with a lot of information. So one of the things that I'm going to be doing is that before we go into the next series, I will always do a quick recap to help kind of solidify what is happening. And what we've decided to do is to start in Matthew 24 and 25 is called the Olivet Discourse because Jesus spoke these things at the Mount of Olives. And so Matthew devoted 2 whole chapters to Jesus' discussion on the end times. And so that is why it's called the Little Apocalypse. So in week 1, we did an introduction. We talked about apocalyptic literature, key terms to know how to interpret it in a way that isn't confusing and is faithful to the text. Last week, week 2, we discussed the abomination of desolation. And boy, that's a heavy topic. And we're going to just do a quick review on that again here tonight. And then tonight, we're going to look at Matthew 24, 29 through 35 on the coming of the Son of Man. And the question of how will we know and what will it look like when Jesus returns? So before we begin, though, I want to do that quick recap on the abomination of desolation. Remember, when we looked in Matthew 24, we saw that the disciples asked Jesus in Matthew 24, verse 3, what would be the signs of his return? Wrong slide, buddy. Yeah, I don't want to confuse people with, yeah, thank you. They asked, what would be the signs of his return at the end of the age? They wanted to know, what should we look for? How will we know? But before Jesus gave them an answer of what would be the signs, he first gave them warnings. He says, let me tell you first, what are not the signs of the end? And so in verses 4 through 8 of Matthew 24, he warned them of false Christs, people who would claim to be the return of Christ. He spoke of wars and rumors of wars. He spoke of nations rising against nations. He spoke of kingdoms rising against kingdoms, famines, and earthquakes. But Jesus said that those are not the signs, but only the beginning of birth pains. That's verse 8. So he says this is just the beginning of birth pains. So we've seen these things. We've seen wars and rumors of wars. We've seen 2 world wars. And I fear that we may see a third one if something doesn't happen soon, especially with the leadership in this nation. Because when there is not a just nation to keep others in check, when weak leaders rise up in a strong nation that should be keeping others in check, nations will take advantage of that. And we've seen that happen, especially these last couple of years, where weak leadership has allowed other nations to say, I'm going to try this and I don't think this nation will respond. And that's how bullying happens on the world stage, when we see dictators and world leaders try to dominate other nations. And it's scary. We're seeing China on the brink of invading Taiwan. We're seeing Russia invading Ukraine. And we're seeing very little done on that world stage. And so it's scary to see what will this lead to, because those kinds of activities, they don't just stop. Those kinds of people will continue to do so until somebody stops them. And so we just pray for all of that. Then in verses 9 to 14 of 24, this is just a quick recap again. Jesus then addresses the signs. He says, okay, now you asked me, what are the signs? And in verses 9 to 14, Jesus finally says, okay, now that you know what are not the signs, let me tell you what are going to be the signs. And he says that there's going to be a great tribulation such as the world has never seen. He says there will be persecution and the world's hatred of Christianity. Did you know that the world hates Christianity? Why does it hate Christianity more so than Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam? Why can a student go to the school and say, I believe in Allah and I want to wear this shirt that speaks of Allah, and everything will say, yeah. Or somebody will come in and will say, I'm a Buddhist and I want to this and proclaim, yes. And they'll say, I'm a secular person, I believe in atheism. I'm a Satanist and I want to wear this thing. No problem. But as soon as a Christian comes in with the cross, a Christian comes in with some sort of beliefs that's a biblical passage or anything, they're sent home. They're immediately told to take that off. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed that the hatred, that the targeting that happens only against Christians? Why is that? Why is there a hatred against Christianity unlike any other faith or belief system? Why do you think that is?
I think it's the accountability. It dispels their free thinking ways. It's not, and it's not all inclusive. It's very specific.
Yeah, I could see that being a major reason.
Whenever Jesus says, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life," that implies as somebody else who doesn't know that belief, it's like, oh, your beliefs are, the only way. So in other words, it has no room for any other faiths or beliefs. It's only Christ.
That's the part that's the most offensive. Because it's not just that he says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. It's what he says next. That none shall come to the Father but by me.
Sometimes we think that that people aren't going to understand the Word of God after the rapture, but actually it's very well today, because Paul tells it in Romans 1 that God has given them a degraded mind, a lustful passion, and no desire to want to know the truth, even after they had no excuse of knowing of God's existence and creation.
Yes.
So right there, Paul is telling us that there are these people that God has allowed them to be that way because of their disbelief and hatreds towards God.
So when somebody who lives that kind of lifestyle or that view system, somebody like a Christian comes and says that is sin in the eyes of God, for them it's going to be offensive. Because you're saying you're criticizing my very way of life, right? My very belief, brother.
One of the biggest things that we have too is the Catholic Church, right? Agree and saying there is no way that Jesus is the only way. There's other ways. They're saying that.
Right.
They declare themselves Christians.
For all, you online viewers, I'm sure you didn't hear that statement. The statement is that when we see churches like the Catholic Church say that there may be other ways to God other than Jesus, then we know that that is already a compromise of the true faith. And that's why the authentic Christianity that proclaims, no, there is no other way but Jesus, that it's offensive to the world. And that is why the world hates Christianity, because it won't bargain. It won't compromise. That's it. And so it's Jesus and Christianity against the rest of the world, because Buddhism says, yeah, you can incorporate this. Hinduism has millions of gods. Atheism says you're the God. And if you want to follow the precepts, I've seen self-proclaimed atheists say, I still follow the teachings of Jesus as a teacher, as a wise man, just as much as I follow the teachings of Socrates or Plato. Well, Jesus wasn't Socrates. He wasn't Plato. He was God in the flesh. And he was the way and the only way to salvation. Amen. That's a far cry from what the world wants to make him. So Jesus warns us here in verses 9 to 14 that he says this will be the first sign. If you go back to what Jesus says to the disciples as we're reviewing here, he says the very first sign of the end is going to be the world, the collective hatred for Christianity. And my friends, I am seeing it like I've never seen it before. I'm seeing a true hate of it in a way that is collectively around the world. Yeah, we saw the Roman Empire. We saw them murdering and killing Christians. But I've said this before, and this may shock you. There are more Christian martyrs today than there were at the height of the Roman Empire. Did you know that? There are more Christians dying for their faith today than there were when Nero and Domitian and Caligula and all those crazy Roman emperors were ruling the world. So we need to be aware of that. Now, we in the United States, we're kind of in a bubble, but we need to look at what's happening in Sudan and Libya and China and Africa, all these areas where Christians are dying for their faith. And they do so with great courage. And they refuse to renounce. And so we pray for the churches worldwide. We need not only to be a praying church, but we need to understand that when we pray for the church, it's not just our church, it's not just the American church, but the worldwide church. So Jesus says that's going to be the first one. Verse 10, he says, many will fall away, betray one another, and hate one another. But what's really sad about this one is he's saying that's going to happen in the church.
That's already been happening, though.
Yes, in what way?
Well, I tell you what, when these clergy under any and all umbrellas of religion have been molesting, raping children.
Yes, yes, stealing money, and that's not. I mean, of course, the hurting of innocent ones
False
is
doctrine.
way.
When you look at the not prophecy, but
The false. You talking about the prosperity
yeah,
gospel?
prosperity gospel. There
Yes.
it is. Yes, that's stepping away from the truth.
And that's actually what Jesus
Leading
says
others astray.
here. He says that many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. So what's bad about these people is that they will lead many astray. And God says, woe to them. It'll be worse. It would have been better if they had never been born. Think about that. That's Jesus speaking truth of the judgment that is waiting those people. And so Jesus is saying, he's saying many will be led astray, false prophets, the betraying of one another. He says lawlessness will increase. He says there will come a point to where in the world there will be no law. Have you seen what happens in the streets, especially in these liberal cities, where
Defunding of police, it just incentivizes crime.
how in the world could any civilized, logical society think that defunding the police in any kind of way would be good and beneficial for their society? There was a radical Democratic leader that was very vocal about defunding the police until she got robbed and beat up. Hold on, brother. Until she got robbed and beat up, and then she posted a picture bleeding, and she says, "I've changed my mind about defunding the police." Oh, you think? And a critic came up and said, when do we need to understand that we shouldn't know this until it happens to us? That's a spirit of self-entitlement. That's a selfish, well, we should be like this, but it's not until it happens to us that all of a sudden we go, well, maybe we should rethink this. When there's politicians suggesting defunding the police, or how about control of guns, walking away with guards that are armed with the same guns that they would propose everybody else not use. Or like when we look at the border crisis, well, no, leave the open border. Okay, we'll ship them over there so why did they do that? So they could see, okay, how would you handle this problem? Oh, we're in crisis. What do we do? Welcome to reality. And so these are issues that we're dealing in our nation, and it's just not our nation. It's worldwide. These are issues that are happening in the church. Brother, didn't want to cut you off too far. Did you want to share something?
Just this morning, our youth is not any better, because just this morning I heard that a young man in a car ran over a retired
Sheriff.
police
On his
chief of
bike?
police on his bike, and he just did it because he thought it was funny. That's the youth. He was only 17 years old, as old as my oldest grandson.
They stole that car.
They stole that
on the
car.
joyride. They recorded it, ran over this man, and then they put it on social media.
And they were laughing about
published the video.
And that is the youth we have today.
And you know what? I'm glad you said that, brother, because the next thing that Jesus says is that the world will grow cold. He says that the love of many will grow cold. Where's the love? Compassion for the fellow man. Verse 14 is where he says that the gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Brother?
Brother, that's here today. For instance, we're talking about the church. I'm the Stanley, the son of Charles Stanley.
Yes.
He used to go to church. This coming weekend, I believe, he's going to have a conference for all homosexual and lesbian up there in the church. And he's supposed to be a Baptist church.
Yeah, so we're seeing the compromise of the faith, of course, with the modern culture, the agendas. So Jesus is saying, look, the world is going to get worse and worse and worse. Many are going to be led astray. Lawlessness will increase, and the world will grow cold. So when you hear these cries of defunding the police and the issues of controlling each other, all of these things are part of the demonic plan to destroy our society. It's a demonic plan, and we need to have eyes to see that. I had a conversation with somebody on this topic, a customer that came in, and talking about how I, vote and so forth. And you'll never see me as a political pastor. Somebody told me, vote like this, vote like that. You know what? I hope that my preaching will give you enough sense to know how to vote. But I'll tell you what I told this person. He says, well, what do you think about this or that, or about the border things, or about taxes and this? And I go, there's lots of issues, aren't there? I said, let me tell you this. Are all the issues the same? He says, well, no. He says, well, what are the issues that matter to you? I said, I don't know, maybe the senseless slaughter of like over 100 million unborn babies. That may be more important than how much taxes I'm paying. Even though my taxes are important to me, they pale in comparison to that, right? I said, so what platforms, what groups support lawlessness, defunding the police? What groups support the breaking down of the societal structure that God has placed, such as the patriarchy, down with man, right? What does God have to say about the role of men in society? Does God consider the role of men important?
Yes.
Does he consider the role of men important in families,
Yes.
as spiritual leaders, as fathers? Do we think that what is the bigger reason for why certain cultures or certain groups and societies are struggling? Is it because, they haven't paid enough reparations for things that happened 400 years ago by people who had nothing to do with it? Or the fact that there's no fathers at home, nobody leading them? And in all of this, Jesus is describing a world where lawlessness exists, a world where people are led astray with lies, and the world growing cold. Again, verse 14, he's saying, and in the midst of this, the gospel of the kingdom is going to be proclaimed throughout the whole world. We now have and live in a society where we can proclaim something and it can be reached throughout the world. These are real issues. And then in verse 15 to 28, Jesus gives another huge sign and a clue to the end of the days, to the end of days in his return, which is the abomination of desolation. I'm still in review form here, okay? But I needed to kind of review this. I did a chart. Go ahead, Marty, to the next one now. I thought this would help because there are a lot of you were like, ooh, that was a lot of information. So I made this, and you may not be able to read it clearly there, but I'll read it for you. I thought, let me give you a timeline that will help. Let's first define the abomination of what we looked at last week, the abomination of desolation, in simple terms. In a nutshell, the abomination of desolation is the offensive act of defiling the temple of God. That's what it is. So when you say, hey, my pastor's covering the end times prophecy, and he talked about the abomination of desolation. Well, what is that? Well, that's an event where some figure, some political figure or religious figure goes into the temple of God who shouldn't and has no authority and is not a believer and defiles the temple of God. He makes it unclean by some sort of offensive act. And we've seen this happen in several places in history. On the far left there, well, let me tell you this. There's a few details here. First, note that Jesus said that this act would be an indicator or evidence of the end to come. He says, when you see that, you're going to be like, the end is near. Now, he doesn't want us to guess which day. That's not the point. But he wants us to have eyes to see. Then I want you to know that it's happened several times in history, as you see there. Several times the abomination of desolation has happened there at the temple. And Jesus says that it's going to happen at the end by the Antichrist. When you see a person go into the temple and declare himself to be God and stand in the place of God, you will know that is the Antichrist, and that is the abomination of desolation that signals the end to come. And then also know that this sign was something that was well known to the Jews because it had happened in their history. So when he references this, he connects it to the prophecy of Daniel. That's what I mentioned last week. And let's look at the timeline now. On the far left there, if you can see it, that's 597 BC. And that's when Nebuchadnezzar goes in. And God said that he would allow them to do that because of their unfaithfulness. Goes in, destroys Jerusalem, burns the temple to the ground. Just razes it to the ground. And he plunders all the gold and everything out of there. That's 597 BC. Then, in 538 BC, which is the next button there to the left, that's towards the end of the exile. After about 70 years, Daniel now receives a vision that it's almost time for them to come home now. It's almost like the time of of Israel's timeout, their divine timeout, and says, okay, it's almost that end. Daniel sees that whenever he looks at the prophecies of Jeremiah, but he also receives a vision that when that temple is rebuilt, there will be somebody else come in again and defile the church. So he gets a vision of another abomination of desolation, which is the third button from the left. And that's when In 167 BC, Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He's a Greek king, goes in, he wants to control that area. He attacks and controls Jerusalem. He goes into the temple. He doesn't burn it to the ground, but what he does is he takes a pig and he slaughters it right there on the altar of God. Well, what do Jews think about pigs? It's the most unclean animal.
Well, they taste good to me.
Well, I'm okay with it. But because of that altar, the whole temple is, but Antiochus did that on purpose because he wanted to discourage and to dishearten the Jewish people. So he wanted them to see that and for them to be spiritually broken to the point that they abandoned their faith. But the exact opposite happened. They rebelled, and that led to the Maccabean revolts. And for a time there, they won their independence for about 70 years until the Romans came. And then along comes Jesus. That's the next one, the fourth one from the left there. And Jesus comes along, and this is what we read in Matthew 24. He predicts that the temple is going to be destroyed, and then he says there's going to be an abomination of desolation again. And he's talking about 70 AD, which is about 35 years from him. And that's when Titus and the Roman people, the Roman soldiers, invade or go in and conquer and destroy Jerusalem. The Romans have had enough with the Jewish rebellion. He says, that's it. We're not only going to go and destroy Jerusalem, we're going to kill them, and then when they run out, we're going to say, no Jews allowed. And that's exactly what he did. And when that happened, he went in, destroyed everything, and then he reset that. He destroyed that temple, by the way, and that temple to this day has not been rebuilt, almost 2,000 years. So you say, when was the last time that the temple existed in Jerusalem? It was when Titus went in with the Romans in 70 AD and razed it to the ground. And he set up a temple to Zeus and to the Roman gods. But since then, it's not been rebuilt. And so to this day, since AD 70, the Jews await the chance to be able to rebuild their temple. And in 35 years, well, actually more than that, 223, what are we, 47 years from now? 47 years from now, they're going to be in a 2,000-year anniversary of their temple being destroyed. So, and we've seen a lot of discussion happening in Israel concerning that. So he predicts that temple destruction, but he also says, and there will be one at the end of days to come. And that's the one that's the final one over here. So the final one is when the Antichrist comes in and destroys, again, declares himself to be God and desecrates the temple. So that's kind of a summary. That's what Jesus was predicting. And the point is, since we're studying end times and prophecy, is you've seen a pattern of some demonic figure coming in and basically offending the people of God and defiling the temple. And Jesus says it's going to happen again at the end with the Antichrist. I talked about, y'all remember I was talking about 3.5 years. Did y'all see how many times I kept repeating? You notice that it's said in different ways. In Daniel, it says there will be a week, but then half a week. Well, that's 3.5. But in this case, the days represent years. We talked about 1,290 days. Well, that's 3.5 years. And it talked about the temple, the sacrifices and everything. Everything comes up to 3.5. Well, just know this, because I know y'all were confused about that. What does that all mean? Well, a full week is a full notch of time. God created the world in 1 week, including the rest, right? So a week is a full spectrum of time. So when he talks about 3.5 days or 3.5 years in this case, what you're talking about is just a moment of time. In other words, it's reflecting just a period, not a full, but just a small portion of time where the people of God will have to endure suffering. And so that is why when Jesus in Matthew 24, 21 to 22, notice what he says there. Matthew 24, 21 to 22, Jesus says, "For then there will be great tribulation such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short." So he's saying there's going to be 7 years of judgment, but only 3.5 years that the people of God will have to be enduring this. which a lot of people think that for 3.5 years, when the final days begin, for 3.5 years, the people of God will be persecuted before their rapture, before Jesus comes. And if that's the case, then what God is saying is, yes, you may suffer for some time, but not forever. I will allow a brief moment of suffering. That's what the 3.5 means. So just keep it simple in that term. That anytime you hear the 1,290 days or 3.5 days or whatever, when you hear all of that, it's just referring to a brief moment of suffering and enduring the things that are happening at that time. Any questions? Or that's kind of a quick summary. I think that would help. I hope that helped.
And that's why, again, and I think you mentioned it last time, it's so important as believers to stay rooted in the Word, stay rooted in the Lord, because we do know that those short periods are gonna come.
That's right. Because a lot of times with the mistaken, because by the way, next week we're going to look at the rapture. So don't miss next week. It's really going to be a good one.
If you're not here, maybe you will rapture.
Yeah, if I'm not here, sorry. Yeah. But what's important to understand is just like what Val says, is that we sometimes think that God is going to protect us from suffering. My brothers and sisters, if you're in some way, if you're living out your true authentic faith, you should already be enduring things.
Amen.
Right? I mean, if you coming to me now, I mean, you heard Brother Charlie's testimony here. He's struggling with things, right? And there's things that you struggle with. I've known some of you for years, and I know the personal sacrifices some of you have made because of your faith. I've known friends and family members who are of the faith that have lost money, lost opportunities, lost friends, lost family, been rejected. So if you're sitting here and you're a proclaimer of the Lord Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, and you're not struggling with something's wrong. That is part and parcel to the suffering that God calls us, because the call to live with Christ is the call to suffer with Christ. And I don't mean to depress you or anybody online, but that is the real truth. And any preacher who doesn't preach that is not preaching you the whole truth. And that God says, I'm not going to promise you that your life is going to be easy, but I promise I'll be with you every step of the way. I promise you that whatever you endure, I will be right there with you. And praise God, because that's the kind of Father that we serve.
Amen.
So now let's go to this next section, the coming of the Son of Man, which falls right into that. And this is in Matthew 24. We're going to look at 29 to 35, but I'm going to split it up from 29 to 31, and then we'll look at 32 to 35. Somebody read for me, please. Matthew 24, 29 to 31.
Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. He will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other.
I love this passage. I love it, man. There's so much promise and so much beauty in this. Well, at least for those who believe. This would be a very frightening passage for those who don't. So Jesus here continues to describe the end of days. He's like, let me give you another sign. And I want you to notice the cosmic signs that Jesus is giving here. Notice that the sun will be darkened. Notice that the moon will not give light. Notice that the stars will fall from heaven. If the sun is darkened, the moon doesn't give light, the stars fall from heaven. Do you sense a darkness over the world? Okay? And then he says that the powers of the heavens will be shaken. This is a very scary thing, right? So you see this powers of the heavens shaking, and you see all of this darkness. Let me ask you something. Do you know what year most historians and scientists consider to be the worst year in the history of the world? Did you know that there is such a thing? Did you know that they asked, it was just, I guess you could say, an academic exercise. They decided to ask a series of historians and researchers and scientists, academics. They says, hey, we have a question for you. Of all the days that have ever existed from the history of the world, from beginning to end, What would be, in your opinion, the worst year to live? Like, I wouldn't want to live in that year.
Was it the beginning of the Great Depression?
That would be one you could think of, right? But that was bad for the United States, not necessarily.
I
For
think
the
it
world,
was
right?
536.
Why do you say that?
Because there was just, I think there was a drought, a severe drought that happened.
How do you know about that year?
I remember seeing it in a video a while back, and it just stuck out to me.
Okay, well, 536 is the answer.
Okay.
The year 536 AD.
Practiced at home.
Yeah, I thought maybe you stole my notes or something.
No, no.
In the year of our Lord, 536, it's the overwhelming favorite for historians. Here's why. In that year, there was a massive volcanic eruption. In fact, it was a supervolcano eruption. And if you don't know what a supervolcano is, you ever heard of Yosemite National Park?
Oh, yeah.
It sits on a supervolcano. There's a reason why it shoots out hot geysers of water. There's something making it hot. On that year, 536 AD, this massive volcanic eruption in Iceland erupted, and it sent so much ash and clouds that the entire known world was clouded with darkness. And as a result, the sun was darkened. The moon did not give light because it wouldn't penetrate through, and it seemed like the stars fell from the heavens. Okay? There was a global temperature drop. It got really cold really quick because the heat from the sun. And then no light coming to the world. What do you think is going to happen to food? The plants, all the plants died. So people were starving. It was freezing. So there was what was considered at that time what's called a volcanic winter. And basically, where the temperatures dropped. Many animals died, carcasses everywhere, the smell of death everywhere, disease as a result of that. So what prospered there were like bacteria and death, basically anything that dealt with death. There was a bubonic plague outbreak in the Byzantine Empire at that time. So the bubonic plague broke out and it killed millions in Europe and Asia. In China, as a result of all this, there were massive floods and droughts. Massive floods and droughts. So much so that there were millions considered to have died, and many migrated because they couldn't live there because of the floods. The Gothic War began between the Byzantines and the Austro-Gothic kingdom at that time, and again, hundreds of thousands were killed there. And in AD 538, which is 2 years after 536, is known as the beginning of the Dark Ages, for a reason. That year was so bad that it marked really the beginning of what's known as at that time, the Middle Ages, or better known as the Dark Ages. And the reason for that is because so many people died, so much was lost, including wisdom, knowledge, understanding, teachers, leaders, and so forth. So it was plunged because there was nobody to really guide them or help them. Disease and famine and everything killed many of the people that could lead the people out of that. And so as a result, they were plunged. And it really, scholars believe that event set back the progress of humanity at least 1,000 years. How about that?
It's like they had to start all over again.
Yes. Yes.
That's horrible.
Here's the point of all this. When Jesus talks about, in those days, the sun being darkened, the moon not giving light, and the stars falling from heaven, that's just one example from history that shows that it can very clearly happen. What if a meteor hit this world? What would happen to the light? Again, these are things that we need to look and examine as very, very easily being able to happen. I'm not saying that that's the way it's going to happen. I'm just saying it's already happened, and it's up to God how it will happen. Not trying to scare you, but understanding. Notice verse 30. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Why are all the tribes of the earth going to mourn?
For those that aren't coming with.
Yeah. I mean, if I see Jesus come in the clouds of heaven, I'm going to get on my knees, or I'm going to raise my hand, I'm going to start singing. I'll sing something. Yes. I don't have to deal with this horrible world anymore. I'm coming home. I don't have to deal with poverty, disease, and death anymore. Jesus has come. But I don't think that other people are going to be so happy when they haven't placed their faith in Christ. So whenever he says that all the tribes of the earth are going to mourn, is because that's when they're going to realize, oh, we got it wrong. We were wrong. And that's going to be a very scary thing. By the way, whenever Jesus says here, the Son of Man, literally the word Son of Man means human. Did you know that? The Son of Man means human in both its Hebrew form and then, of course, translated to the Greek form. God used that term to address it to Ezekiel. If you look, we're not going to read it tonight, but in Ezekiel 33, 7 to 12, he keeps saying, Son of Man, what do you see? Son of Man, look at this. And basically what God is saying is human, what do you see? Human, what is happening here? But the term, very quickly after that, became a term for the Messiah. Because it says it's going to be one like a Son of Man. Well, like a Son of Man means he's going to be like a human, but he's not going to be totally human. And which is why it's so interesting to me that the Jews missed it. I mean, for all their scholarship, they said, well, he's not supposed to be some divine figure. He's supposed to be a socio-political, just a person. What do you think it means to say one like a Son of Man? Like a Son of Man is, he's not completely a Son of Man. He's like a Son of Man. In other words, if you read John 1:14, whenever it looks at the coming of Jesus, that it talks about that he came and he was clothed. He had the flesh, but underneath the flesh there was divine glory. We beheld his glory. And so just know that this meaning, this reference, was for the Messiah, and it started with Daniel in Daniel 7, 9 to 14. Notice Daniel 7, 9 to 14. Daniel 7, 9 to 14. So for the longest time, this term, Son of Man, just was a human, but Daniel changed it. When Daniel gave this prophecy, it all of a sudden became a vision for the Messiah. Daniel 7, 9 to 14, and I want you to listen to this description. This is a vision that God gives to Daniel. As I looked, thrones were placed. How many? Is there an S at the end of your thrones, or is it just one throne? Wait, are you saying that Daniel had a vision of the Ancient of Days, which refers to Elohim, God? Well, we know it's God the Father, right? He says, and I looked and I saw the Ancient of Days, but not one. I saw two thrones. Thrones were placed. If you have something to write with, I want you to underline thrones, and I want you to put plural with an exclamation point. Praise God, because thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. That is God, right? His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000 thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. You go back to the start of Revelation, and there is the throne room of God, and there is God himself sitting in the throne, and they bring forth to start the judgment. So one of the unique functions of God the Father is judge. He is the one who determines when the judgment will begin. He's the one sitting in the throne, but it's not just one. Because look at verse 11. Then I looked because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking. And as I looked, the beast was killed, and we'll talk about the beast here in a little bit, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season at a time. Now, watch this. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a Son of Man. And he came to the Ancient of Days. Who's the Ancient of Days? God. He saw somebody coming, and he looked like a Son of Man. In other words, he looked like a human, but he was coming in the clouds of heaven. Shall I repeat to you verse 30? They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. Right? Do you see that? So Jesus here is referring the man that Daniel saw. He's saying to the disciples, you're looking at him now. I wonder if their knees buckled a little. Because these Jewish men, they were raised in these stories, and these, well, not just like stories as if they're not true, but in these prophecies. And imagine, Jesus is standing, goes, you remember the Ancient of Days? Remember there were 2 thrones? Yes, my Lord. Remember the Ancient of Days takes a seat? Yes. And then there came one like a Son of Man? Yes. You remember he came and went to the Ancient of Days? Yeah. You're looking at it. So this is powerful. And it was presented to him, and notice verse 14. And this is, of course, in Daniel 7. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed.
Isn't that also substantiated by when, I think Jesus says, I don't know, if, and I apologize, but
No, it's okay.
he sits at the right hand of the Father.
Yes.
So God will be sitting here, and Jesus would be right here.
Yes. That image, he's sitting at the right hand of the Father. Well, Jesus, I know one thing. The Father sits on the throne. He's the Ancient of Days. You're going to be sitting at the right hand, not the left. The right is the most, that is like the prime spot, the prime position. And so that is a great connection to it.
Yeah.
And so, again, and remember when I said like a Son of Man? It's not that Jesus wasn't human, but he wasn't just human, right? John 1:14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So what we see here is Jesus pointing to the visions of Daniel, and here are 2 thrones. So when the Muslims say, where did Jesus say that he is God? Where did he go? You can connect that right there and say, well, all I know is that anybody who is worthy to take the throne next to the Ancient of Days is God to me. When you read John, and he says, and we beheld his glory as in the flesh, and he wasn't just a Son of Man, he was like a Son of Man. All of these are indications of the great glory of our Lord and Savior. Questions or comments before I go on? That's a lot, I know. So, Daniel saw one like a Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. This is the exact descriptor that Jesus uses in Matthew 24:30. Now I want you to go Revelation chapter 1, verses 7 to 8. I hope I'm not hitting you too hard with all this.
That's good.
Everybody with me?
Yes.
Everybody walk away or run. So what I'm trying to do here, if you haven't figured it out, is that God blessed Daniel with some great visions of the end. Then Jesus comes and affirms those visions by referencing specifically to Daniel, and then Revelation under the disciple John seals the deal. So what you have is an Old Testament witness to the end of days. You have Jesus affirming the end of days, and not only affirming it, saying, I am the end of days. And then in Revelation you see the full circle. Revelation 1, 7 to 8. Somebody read that for me, please.
Behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all tribes of the earth will wail on account of him.
Wait. What did you just say there? All
tribes of the earth will wail on account of him.
Verse 30, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. That's Matthew 24, verse 30. Do you see that? In other words, not everybody's going to be happy to see
That's
Jesus.
right.
Keep going, brother.
So even so, amen. Can we read 8 also? Or?
Yes, verse 8.
I am the Alpha and the Omega, says Lord God, who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty.
I love the fact that Jesus is past, present, and future there.
Yes.
Okay? We see the physical manifestation of Jesus in the flesh in the birth of Jesus. But that's not when Jesus began. Jesus always has been. He is eternal, just like his Father, just like the Spirit. And when we see he was, we actually see what many people call typologies or or demonstrations of Jesus in the Old Testament. Some people think, for example, when Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego were thrown in the flames, who's the fourth person?
Jesus.
Right? So we see the angel of God or one of the Lord coming to speak, and in many ways we can see that there can be evidence that even though Jesus became flesh specifically, yes, at that time in history, we can still see that his presence is still notable throughout history. So that's important. Yes?
I have a question, and it kind of lends to the conversations we've had on music and who the songs raise. Why is God not coming back to settle? Or is it that Jesus is in fact God? So God is in fact settling. Therefore, when you praise Jesus, you are praising God.
That is it. It's option 2. And you say, well, why can't it be God the Father? I love that question. Here's why. Why can't, it's the same reason for why Moses couldn't see God. Why couldn't Moses see
You're
God?
overwhelming, we couldn't.
Yeah, because the presence of divine glory, perfection, holiness before an unholy. So I talked to somebody who said, well, why won't God just show up? I go, because you died.
Yeah.
That might be a problem. If God were to appear before such a wicked and sinful people, we'd burn alive.
Thus the reason and the need for Jesus at all.
That's right.
That's his role.
This is mind-blowing, I know, and it's beautiful because you're right, because Jesus, the manifestation of Jesus in the flesh, is a way for God to become us in order to save us from ourselves. And so Jesus is the image of God, which is why he tells Philip, when Philip says, wow, he's all emotional about what Jesus is saying about the Father. He says, show us the Father. He's like, Philip, I've been with you this time, this much, and you still want to see the Father? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father.
Amen. Brother, I was just going to mention, going back to like what you were saying about Jesus, right? He's always been, he's always been there. And I always remember that passage here in Genesis 1:26, where it says, then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness.
Amen. And he says, and so it's like, who's he talking to, right? I spoke to, he was a professor, I'm trying to think of what seminary, and he and I had a big debate about that, because he says his take on it was, well, he's speaking to the heavenly host of the angels. He's not speaking to Jesus and the Holy Spirit. I go, really? Are we made in the image of the angels? Or shall I take you back to Hebrews chapter 1, where it says that he made him a little bit lower than the angels, that we're not the angels?
Right.
And he says, yeah, that's a part that's hard to resolve. I go, not for me. It ain't hard for me. He didn't speak to the heavenly host and said, let us make them in our image. The angels are different than us,
yes.
Which is something you need to understand, that when we die, we don't become angels. Angels are completely different creatures. Angels were created by God as servants and beings in heaven, but angelic beings are not, like in the cartoon, somebody dies and they have and they go back up there and they're now an angel. So when they say, oh, they're an angel in heaven, no, we're glorified beings, and when we're raised, we will be in our glorified bodies. But there's a difference between angels and humans. Did you know that? And so that can be confusing to understand. But God differentiates, and his word differentiates between the angelic being and the human.
So that also substantiates the disclaimer that when a loved one dies, well, she's my guardian angel watching over.
Correct. That's incorrect.
She's not.
That is correct. And we need to, and so we hear that a lot at funerals, right?
Yes.
Or, oh, well, they're in heaven smiling down at us now. No, if they're in heaven, they're in the presence of the Lord. And sometimes I wonder if they are in heaven. Some of the when you're watching the videos and it's some of their lives and so forth. Again, it's not for us to judge, but the point is that there's people who think that when we die, we become something that other than what we are. We are still who we are, but we're going to be in our glorified selves. So, all right. So let's keep going on this, because this is there's a lot here. I want you to note now the final verse here in verse 31, and I'm going back to Matthew 24. Matthew 24 and verse 31. Somebody read verse 31 of Matthew 24.
And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other.
So, you ever notice that there's trumpets everywhere? Right? We see it in the Old Testament. There's with the loud trumpet call, the walls of what city fell down? Jericho. So the trumpet is the trumpet call. Of course, I'm trying to think of what the shofar, or what's called the horn of Israel. It was a shofar, I think it was called, and it's the horn that signaled the coming army and so forth. So we see trumpets throughout, and in Revelation we see that there will be 7 trumpets, and that there will be these trumpet calls. But what Jesus is speaking to here, many take to be the trumpet call of the elect, which is the rapture, which we're going to discuss next week. Notice that with that trumpet call, it says that gathers the elect from the 4 winds. Well, what do you mean by 4 winds? North, south, east, west. In other words, from all corners of the earth. Everybody, all of the elect. Well, who's the elect?
We are.
You better raise your hand.
We are.
Or otherwise, you can be here next Wednesday if we're called to rapture by yourself. We're the elect from one end of heaven to the other. So notice, I want you to listen to what it says, and if you want to go there with me, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 to 18. And we're actually going to really look at this next week. So I'm just going to reference it as an enticer, so you can come back. Where is this idea of the rapture, right? And again, I'm just kind of teasing you. Right? 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 to 18. So if you've got questions on this, I'm not going to answer completely right now because we're going to have to wait till next week because I want to finish this up on the coming of the Son of Man. But I want you to notice the common themes that match what Jesus is saying about in that end of day. When you see me coming in the clouds of heaven, by the way, have you heard people say, oh, Jesus has come back, he's probably over there. No. Don't worry, because Jesus says, if you hear that he's out there in the wilderness, whatever, don't believe it. Remember when he says that? Yes. If you heard that, you know why? He says, because when I come back, there's going to be no question about it. Everybody's going to see, there's going to be no doubt. That's Jesus coming. So it's like, oh, he's over there in Pennsylvania. No. Or Jesus came back in 1950. No.
Well, it's just like a king's entrance. Like, they're not going to, they're not going to sneak, and he's the almighty king, so he's going to come with
as a king should. That's the King of Kings. I love that thought.
And I think it's amazing that everyone is going to see this happen, right? Everyone in the world is going to see this happen all at the same time.
Yes.
Redeemed and unredeemed.
Everybody.
Everyone.
And it says here, all the tribes of the earth. Yeah. So there's a distinction. In other words, don't forget, not everybody's going to be going, yay.
No. But they're going to see it and they're going to be like,
yeah.
Either you're going to rejoice
or you're going to be crying.
That's right.
So, First Thessalonians.
I wonder, Brother Irby, like right now, you look at the sun. The guy in Japan looks at the same sun. The guy in Africa is looking at the same sun. We're all looking at the sun. Well, this time I think that the heavens open up is that third dimension that Christ is talking about, that God is talking about, where all the angels are fighting and the wars. It opens up and then he comes and presents himself.
I think that's a very good way to put it because it matches when Paul talks about in Ephesians the heavenlies. 5 times he references what's called in the heavenlies, that Jesus rules in the heavenlies. He doesn't say heaven. It's not uranos, it's uranioi. And what it's a totally different dimension. So he said, well, why is it not heaven? Because he says it's where demons exist too. Yep. So it's this dimension where the demonic activity, you can say, well, if there's demons, show them to me. Well, you can't see them. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but you can sense them. You can, I don't know, have you ever been near somebody that is clearly not a believer and you can sense something bad? I remember not too long ago, Madi mentioned to me about an experience that she had, that somebody came by and she sensed it and he sensed it in her. And there was this moment of something's wrong. Kayla remembers this one time we were in a public bus together, and there was a person sitting right in front of me, and I made him very uncomfortable. And
he was staring at you too. And
yeah.
You were trying to leave. He was just like.
Yeah, he was, and you could tell he was uncomfortable in my presence. But he had a pentagram. He was clearly a Satanist. But that's what happens, right? And you're right. It's going to be this peeling away of a dimension, and we're going to see what was always there. And so in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 to 18, you see this common theme of a great tribulation, Jesus coming on the clouds, the trumpet call, and the gathering of the elect. Same thing that Jesus said. Notice. Now, Paul is describing, let me tell you what's going on here. The church in Thessalonica was freaking out because Paul had taught them about the return of Jesus. Like, oh, okay, Jesus going to come back, he's going to take us, yeah. But then, while Paul was away, Bubba passed away, and Sister Susie passed away because they were old or whatever, they got sick or whatever, and they started freaking out. Oh no, Bubba's missing out and going to heaven. Oh no, Sister Susie's. So they sent a letter saying, what do we do? We got people dying and Jesus hasn't come back yet. Are they doomed forever? So Paul is answering the question, no. It doesn't matter if you die before Jesus comes or if you're alive when Jesus is alive. That's not the way the rapture, and that's not the way the gathering of the elect is going to work. And notice what he says. But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep. In other words, about those who passed away. That you may, and notice he says asleep, and that properly so, because death sounds final, sleeping sounds not. Who else referred to death as sleep? Who said, no, he's not dead, he's only sleeping. Or she's not dead, she's only sleeping. And people laughed. And then Jesus made people look stupid whenever they laughed at him. Notice that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. In other words, don't grieve when they die, like the other people who have no hope. Right. Notice verse 14. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. In other words, at the end, those who have died, they're going to rise again too. Verse 15. For this we declare to you by a word from the Lord. Here it is. That we who are alive when Jesus comes back, who are left until the coming of the Lord. Same incident that Jesus talked about the coming of the Lord. Now, if you happen to be alive, will not precede those who have fallen asleep. In other words, you're not going to go to heaven and then everybody else has to wait. It's going to all happen at once. And then notice, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with the cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with, what does it say? The sound of the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. And I'll talk about the rapture tomorrow, so you have to save your questions. But what is described here is different than what many people describe. What they say is, well, wait a minute, the people who have died, aren't they already in heaven? But when it's talking about the rapture, it's not just the rapture of those who are alive, who are going to be meeting Jesus in heaven, but it's talking about the rising of the glorified bodies of those who have been dead and buried too. In other words, it's a one-time event where at that moment, everybody receives their glorified body. The people who are alive will be glorified in the bodies that they're in, and those who are dead will come. Now, I don't know how it's going to work. I don't know the minutia of how that's going to happen. But what I do know that at that moment, God is going to redeem and call his elect together. And at that moment, that all who have believed will receive their glorified bodies. That's the event. Otherwise, it makes no sense that he's saying that those who have passed away or whatever, that they won't be left behind. So the only people who will be left behind are those who didn't believe.
Is there a reference anywhere in here to things like livestock, the beasts of the ocean? Honestly, I'm going to be honest, this is like I want Max to be with me, right?
Yeah.
I can't seem to find a scripture that says that. Is there any speaking to animals?
Not German shepherds. Pugs, yes, but not German dogs. Just joking.
I don't think so, because pugs are gluttonous. Go ahead.
Yeah, and you know what? That is a common question. That's really people haven't been able to agree on that. I'm of the belief that all creatures, that when the heavens are redeemed, that what I consider what I call soulish creatures, and that is, I'm not just making that up. I'm not just speaking just out of my opinion, but the Hebrew does talk about soulish creatures, creatures that have this sense, that would be like dogs and cats and so forth. The only reference that people make who advocate for the existence of animals is when Isaiah speaks of the lion laying down with the lamb, and about the creatures that are redeemed. And so that when we see this world
You
that,
call that symbolic?
yeah, some people take it as a symbolic definition versus a literal definition. I am of the thought, and this is Irby speaking now. Don't consider it to be the divine word of God or whatever. This is of my thought. My interpretation is that God's creation was not just humans. That the creation that He made of the world, it would not make sense to me that He would create this world with all of the creatures that are in it, and then redeem the world without those creatures in it. Which is why I think Isaiah is making the reference to the lion laying down with the lamb, meaning that at that time, all of the creatures that God has elected to create will not be destroying each other and killing each other and so forth. In other words, He's going to put everything in order.
And to that, Brother Irby, I would add, I love Charlie and I loved all the dogs that I've had, and I've had many.
Oh, but don't call Charlie a dog.
But I don't plan to ever see them again. I'm like you. Maybe there is a plan for God to have creatures in our lives. The ones that we know today, no, I don't see that. But God will provide
Yeah.
because it's part of His creation.
To me, I take it from that end. My interpretation is that when you look in Revelation, when He reconciles all of creation, it doesn't say part of His creation. I take it as all of His
All of
creation.
His creation.
It includes the creatures that He's created, and we don't need to be so arrogant to think that we're the only creatures He's
The only
created.
ones that are promised eternal salvation, the only ones, no animals, no nobodies, is you and me.
Well, sure, because when you look at creation, we're created what's called imago Dei, in the
Yeah.
image of God. We're the only ones that are created with the spirit and understanding to worship. But to me, that's a different issue than the reconciliation of all creatures. But again, stay tuned for that, because we will talk about that a little bit more. But I'll tell you now, there's not a definitive answer. I'm of the belief that yes, that all creatures will be included, because all of creation will be redeemed and reconciled. Sister?
I think there's a verse that says, "Let everything that has breath praise the Lord."
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that they're included too.
Yeah. So when you look at it from that aspect, we're not the only ones that were given breath. Yeah. Thank you, sister. So finally, this last one. Go to Matthew 26, 57 to 68. I'm going to save the lesson from the fig tree that we're going to look at for next week.
You know
We
what's
had
interesting about that in 2 Thessalonians, brother, is that when the dead will rise, if you were cremated, guess what? Your ashes are gonna turn back into bones. If you were desecrated and you were mangled to death or whatever, and bones were scattered, all those bones are gonna come back together.
yeah. There's been
Everything is gonna come back.
Yeah, and I think that there's an image, and we'll talk about the rapture next week a little bit, but we're going to talk about the vision of how many of you ever heard of the Valley of the Dry Bones?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna mention.
No, you can't mention it, brother, because we're going to look at it next week. Mention it next week. But Matthew 26, 57, and 68. Jesus has given this whole story, right? We just read about we'll see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of glory, right? Then, once he finishes in Matthew 24 and 25, then he's arrested and he goes to trial. So this is kind of the last teaching on the final judgment before he's arrested. That's interesting, right? Then in Matthew 26, 57 to 68, he stands before the Sanhedrin and he's being judged. And notice what happens. Everybody there? He's before the high priest, Caiaphas, and the council. It says, and those who had seized Jesus led him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered, and Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest, and going inside, he sat with the guards to see the end. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus, that they might put him to death. They were looking for any kind of way, right? But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last, two came forward and said, this man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to rebuild it in 3 days. What was he referring to? Just to make sure everybody knows. Himself, right? Not the literal temple, but his body. And the high priest stood up and said, have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you? But Jesus remained silent. Remember Isaiah said, like a lamb led to slaughter, he didn't open his mouth. And the high priest said to him, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Now, this is important. At that moment, he appealed to the name of God for him to reveal the truth to them. Now, so Jesus responds for that reason, because he will not have his Father, what's the word I'm going to say, disrespected or defiled in his presence. And Jesus said to him, you have said so. You have said so, but I tell you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his robes and said, he has uttered blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment? They answered, he deserves death. Then they spit in his face and struck him. And some slapped him, saying, prophesy to us, you Christ, who is it that struck you? They crucified him for speaking the truth. They crucified him for being the Son of God. That's what they did. And I get emotional when I read that because he asked a question and he answered it and he spoke truth. To the very end, he spoke truth. And they killed him for it.
Well, they also are killing him for defiling, right? Like their temple.
For blasphemy.
With God.
Yeah, because to them they didn't believe. And so in their eyes, here's this nutcase over here claiming to be God, in the flesh, being the Son of God. But they had no eyes to see. I mean, they had seen the miracles, they had seen the witnesses, they had seen the evidence. And it goes to show you, my friends, that there will be some people that no matter how much evidence, no matter what you show them, they will not believe. And it just comes down to a faith. It's a faith issue. And I love apologetics, don't get me wrong. I love answering questions to people. But I remember talking to this one young man a few years ago, and he kept asking questions. Okay, well, what about this? And I would answer, oh, wow, okay. And this, and this. And then finally, I stopped after about 30 minutes, and I said, you're going to have a question after this one, and you're going to have a question after that one, you're going to have a question after that one. At some point, it's just a faith question. Are you willing to take the step of faith? Because if you're waiting until you have all of your questions answered, you will never come to faith. At one point, you have to just say, do I believe? And he accepted the gospel. And he prayed the prayer with me, and he made a commitment of faith. And so it's okay to have questions, but at some point you have to just decide, who is Jesus? And here they crucified him for being the Son of God. And in his description, it matches what he says. The next time you see me, Mr. Pharisee, the next time you see me, Caiaphas, you're gonna see me coming on the clouds of heaven. And then you're gonna know, you're gonna weep.
That sounds awkward, brother, when Nicodemus was talking to Jesus.
Nicodemus.
The first thing Nicodemus say, we know that you come from God, because no one who cannot come from God cannot do the things that you do.
Imagine that, brother. Nicodemus says, we know, not just him, we know that you come from God. Well, then why don't you believe? Because you're messing up things.
Exactly.
If we accept you, then we have to accept that we're wrong. We have to accept that we're not right. And some people are just not willing to see the truth. The good news about Nicodemus is he came to faith.
Would you venture to say that Caiaphas is not going to be there with us?
No,
He
I do.
never-
I see
he
no
never
evidence at all.
resolved.
Yeah, I see no evidence at all
Who?
that Caiaphas, the high priest who condemned him. Yeah, no, there's no evidence at all. In fact, I see the very opposite. I see him working in everything to accuse Jesus, and even later you'll see after the resurrection, working to
Dispel all that?
yes,
And the other one,
paying the guards off to say that it didn't happen.
and the only one of them was Nicodemus, because we see it in chapter 7 and in chapter 19 what happened with him. Now, that's how we come to believe that he was saved, because of that.
So it's to me it's a great way to stop here. And like I said, we'll do the lesson from the fig tree. It's okay. It's kind of a separate thought, but still we'll look at it next week. The coming of Jesus. Here's the point that you need to really understand. There's going to come a day when we look up and we're going to see Jesus coming on the clouds of heaven. Now we're going to see it in one of two ways. We're either going to already be in heaven and we're going to see it, or we're going to be here on earth, and before we pass away, we're going to see it. But rest assured, we're all going to see it. When we see Jesus coming on the clouds of heaven, it is not just a witness just for the earth. All of creation will see it, which includes the people in heaven. So if you die and you go to heaven, you're still going to see it. The witness of the Son of God coming on the clouds of heaven is a complete creation. Now, you say, well, how does that work? I don't know. But I can't wait to see it. But such is the glory of God.
Amen.
Questions, comments before we close?
There is a question on Facebook. It says, will the prophecies of the end of times be completed before Matthew 24:14?
Great question. Will the prophecies be completed there? No, because there's still more to come. Because what we'll see, especially when we look in Revelation, we'll see that in Jesus' return, we see a millennium of rule. And we'll have to look at that. And this is where we're going to get into some potentially confusing jargon, such as, am I a premillennialist? Am I an amillennialist? Am I a postmillennialist? And then, are you post or pre-tribulation or post-tribulation? Those are very confusing terms. I'll bring those to you, and I'll make it as simple as possible. But the quick answer is no. The coming of the Son of Man is not immediately, because what we're going to see is, after the millennium where Jesus rules, you're still going to see the great and final war where Armageddon occurs. And finally, the final judgment. Because a lot of people think that Satan is in hell. No, he's on this earth, and he's alive and
Flourishing.
And flourishing, obviously.
Brother Irby, I'll admit it right now. I'm a premillennialist.
Well, we'll talk about those things, and we'll look at it. Yeah. So no. Tell them there's more to come. In fact, Jesus coming it sets a whole new age for the world. Stay tuned. Tell them to stay tuned. So let's go to
One point to mention, brother, for us to know, to pay attention. The next study you're going to do with the fig tree is very important.
Oh yeah, no.
The sign that we need.
I did not want to rush this fig tree, because this
Right.
fig tree is very important, and it's actually tied to Revelation in a lot of ways.
Right.
So, all right, well, let's go to the Lord. Lord Father, I thank you for this day, this study, for my brothers and sisters who are here. Lord, hear our prayers, Lord, for our loved ones. We lift them up and ask that you be with them, Lord. For those who are struggling, fighting disease, illness, for those who are carrying burdens, Lord Father, may you be with our blessed brothers and sisters. Lord, may you watch over us this week and bring us back faithfully here, Lord Father. Oh, Lord Father, we're about to celebrate 5 years here at this church, and I stand in awe of what you've done. Lord, I thank you for this place that we call home. And thank you for bringing us along for the ride, to show us and for us to see, Lord, how good you are. Father, you're good all the time. Your Son is our cornerstone, and your Spirit is our strength. We thank you, Lord Father, for this night. Bless us as we go home and go throughout our weeks. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.